In this video, we take a look at some of the remaining settings under the System tab. We have Bucket Scanning Mode, which is the spatial orders for the rendering buckets. By default, we have Spiral. That's why when I render my scene to the picture viewer, you can see the buckets are rendering the image in this spiral fashion from the center of the image. We also have top, left, random, spiral, and Hilbert. So if I set it to random and render my scene again, you can see the buckets start randomly in different places. It's basically your choice. I'm gonna set it to default spiral mode. We have the bucket size, which is quite self-explanatory. So if I change it to something like 16 and render my scene, you can see the buckets are much smaller compared to the previous one. So bigger buckets give you slightly quicker final renders, but smaller buckets give you faster initial feedback. I'm gonna stop the render and set the bucket size to 64 pixels, which is good enough. We have display bucket corners. If enabled, you can see the buckets being rendered are highlighted in both the picture viewer and the IPR, like what we saw in our render. You can disable it only in IPR or disable it completely. Then we have auto detect threads, which allows Arnold to detect the number of cores and threads of your CPU. You can disable auto detect and specify the number of threads you want Arnold to use manually, in case you want to limit Arnold to use all your machine resources. If set to 0, Arnold will use all the threads. If I use something like 30, Arnold will use 30 threads, and you can dedicate the rest of the threads to other tasks. You can use negative values here. If I use something like -4, for example, Arnold will utilize all the threads except 4 of them. Let's enable auto detect. For now, we have export scale, which defines the mapping between Cinema 4D and Arnold units. Let me just quote the user guide for this parameter. The default 1 meter means that 1 unit in Arnold equals 1 meter. The scene units in Cinema 4D are defined in the project settings. Under the project scale, you can see where the default is 1 centimeter. Therefore, a 0.01 scaling is used when translating the scene to Arnold. If you work with small objects with radii of 1 centimeters, for example, you might need to change the export scale to 1 centimeter instead of 1 meter. This parameter affects all length unit values like vertices, camera and light position, displacement, height, bump height, etc. We talked about device selection and GPU settings in the GPU rendering lesson. The IPR settings was covered in the first lesson of this section when we discussed IPR window. Down here you have a few search paths. Basically, you can define where Arnold should look for your procedurals, plugin, and textures. When I say plugin, I mean third-party shader libraries, custom procedural, or volume binaries. After that, you have some simple licensing option, and that's it. So in this video, we learned about system settings. See you in the next one.